Monster films are a rare treat nowadays, with most being either inadequate or not exciting. One of the most successful genres in the monster films has to be that of the werewolf films, with an interesting arc for the protagonist turning into the hairy beast. Over the years, we have witnessed quite a few werewolves, but female werewolves are rare. Even though some projects lead with female werewolves, these projects haven't hit the mainstream market yet. Let's look at some of the female werewolves from the movies that can indicate that this genre is worth exploring. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you, and let's begin. Seraphine Piggott in An American Werewolf in Paris, 1997. The first on this list of werewolves is a character connected to one of the best werewolf movies ever made. Seraphine Piggott is the daughter of David Kessler from An American Werewolf in London, 1981. And like her father, she suffers from lycanthropy. Her mother took her away from London to Paris to find a cure for her daughter. During her time in France, Seraphine met another werewolf, Claude, who was much more proud of being a werewolf than she was. Her stepfather, Dr. Piggott, tends to find a cure for her, but instead of curing her, he turns her into a werewolf, and she ends up killing the doctor and severely injuring her mother. Ridden with guilt, she decides to kill herself by jumping off of the Eiffel Tower, but then an American tourist comes and saves her. Yes, that would be the American Werewolf in Paris. Unlike the other werewolves in the movie, she is good and tries to save Andy and his friends from being killed by Claude and his gang of werewolves. She even asks Andy to eat her heart when his bullet injures her. But later, she manages to survive when Andy kills Claude and eats his heart out. The alternate ending ends up hinting at a cure that her father had found before his death, but it doesn't help since after that, she marries Andy and their child has the werewolf eyes. Even though her werewolf looks like a nightmare, it is nowhere close to how David Kessler's werewolf looked because they used a lot of CGI in the sequel. Thanks to Rick Baker, the transformation scene from the original movie will remain a masterpiece. Marsha Quist in The Howling, 1981. Joe Dante has created some of the most craziest movies with the most exciting monsters. The Howling is a perfect example. One can always remember the iconic werewolf it gave us with Marsha Quist. Marsha wasn't interested in Dr. George Wagner's attempts at domesticating the werewolves, and it became apparent that she had other motives, along with her friends. When Wagner convinces Karen and her husband to visit the community of the werewolves, Marsha intends to prey on her husband and break them apart. At the same time, her friend Eddie targeted Karen. Even though the other werewolves were set on fire inside the barn, Marsha managed to escape. She was later seen eating a hamburger, an exciting food choice for the most interesting werewolf. Marsha makes for a wild addition to this list of werewolves, since other than being a beast, she is a nymphomaniac. One of the most craziest scenes from the movie is when Marsha and Bill have intercourse, as both turn into their feral forms, since Bill was bitten by a werewolf, probably Marsha. This character was supposed to be explored in the sequels, but her arc ended with this movie due to the actor's unavailability. She was planned to be shown as one of the Sturba's people sent to infiltrate Wagner's community. Since there have been discussions about another addition to the Netflix franchise, we may witness Marsha return to this age of dying monster films. Ginger Fitzgerald in Ginger Snaps movies. The 2000 film Ginger Snaps spawned one of Canada's best trilogy of werewolf movies, and the franchise still lives. In a list of female werewolves, the Fitzgerald sisters deserve a mention, and their story makes for one of the best in the world of werewolf cinema. Ginger Fitzgerald is the sister of Bridget Fitzgerald, and the latter always looked for Ginger due to her tendency to land into trouble. Both of them were close, but then Ginger went ahead and got into a mess more enormous than she could handle, so she became the film's main antagonist. After being attacked by the beast of the Bailey Downs, Ginger starts experiencing certain bodily developments. She goes on a rampage of kills when her sister cures her boyfriend Jason, and this only makes her more ruthless. Bridget accidentally kills her while intending to cure her with a monkhood, but that isn't the end of her, since she ends up coming as an apparition that mocks and taunts Bridget as she transforms into a werewolf. Ginger's werewolf appears to have pale whitish fur, a unique look for this movie. Because of this, the creature is called Ginger Wolf. Bridget Fitzgerald in Ginger Snaps movies. The other half of the Fitzgerald sister duo, Bridget, is the wiser one, and she will fight to cure her sister until the very end. While both sisters were outcasts, Bridget was always ahead of her sister, even when communicating with others. That's how she managed to stay away from some of the problematic situations. While Ginger got into the world of werewolves very quickly, Bridget constantly attempted to save her, even for her own sake. Due to her nature of keeping to herself, she would be the one who would be bullied the most, and Ginger would come to her rescue. Even though they had a close bond with their blood pact and other things, Ginger would feel distant from her sister when Bridget started having her periods, leading to a circumstance where this would be the very beginning of the time that both would part ways, as her werewolf instinct consumed Ginger, and her behavioral pattern was affected by that. Around the end, when she is trying to save Ginger, she cuts open her arm and exposes it to Ginger's blood so that the virus passes on to her. Even though she intends to save her sister, the latter pounces on her, and Bridget uses a knife to stab the werewolf in the heart, thus killing her sister. Unlike her sister, she tends to be a bit softer and is aware of the consequences of the actions that her werewolf form can take. Following Ginger's death, Bridget becomes more introverted and tries to avoid other werewolves, but she is haunted by her sister's ghost, who continues to mock and taunt her. Eventually, she reaches this girl who goes by the title of the Ghost, and even though she appears friendly at first, later it becomes clear that she intends to use Bridget as a weapon. Megan in Dog Soldiers 2002. Megan is a rather complicated character in identifying which side she was on during the events of the Dog Soldiers 2002. She comes to the rescue of a group of British soldiers who were supposed to be meeting a special ops unit and instead finds them all dead with only one survivor. The werewolves turn to attack them when the full moon shines, except for Megan, who introduces herself as a zoologist hunting werewolves. As the group is forced to take refuge in a barn, Megan shows up in her actual form as a werewolf, along with other group members. The most exciting aspect of her character, until the twist when she reveals her true identity, is that she is dedicated to saving these soldiers. Even though she ends up putting them in danger, her initial behavior indicates she sees another opportunity to help them. When talking about the Uath werewolves, she mentions how she hated being a part of this fucked up family. Her turn to get them killed is only triggered when she realizes that these soldiers won't be her way of getting out of her ditch. Megan was killed when the farmhouse blew up, the final move played by Harry G. Wells. Yes, it does seem like H.G. Wells, as he starts turning into the feral beast.
We've been expecting you.
A bag is something!
Sturba in Howling 2, Your Sister is a Werewolf, 1985. Sturba is a character who made a significant mark in this genre of cinema and will probably be the most memorable character in film history to make this list. Unlike the other characters on this list, Sturba is known as the queen of all werewolves and is probably the oldest too. Residing at a coven inside the castle in Transylvania, she has conducted a variety of occult events that have included blood sacrifices and even orgies. The sequel to Howling involves her looking for the blood of the lamb to retain her youth and beauty, which she uses against her prey. Sturba's fate was written along with that of her nemesis, the werewolf hunter Stefan Krosko, as they fight against each other. As Stefan and his hunters arrive in Transylvania to hunt each person associated with Sturba, she uses her powers against them. She manages to kill his people one by one, using some crazy powers and spells. When she comes across Stefan, she uses her spells to keep him from harming her, while he uses his titanium dagger, her weakness, to attempt to stab her. Finally, he succeeds, and both burst into flames after her magic energy causes an explosion. Even though this movie is campy at best, Sybil Danning delivers an iconic performance as Sturba. She would appear as Sturba in one of the fake trailers in Grindhouse 4 film titled Werewolf Women of the SS. Ellie Meers in Cursed, 2005. It is interesting to notice that Christina Ricci has become a genre legend since her appearance as Wednesday in the Addams Family movies. Cursed only solidifies her presence in the genre and makes for one of the best entries to this list. Ellie and her brother encounter certain people who convert them into furry beasts. But unlike Ginger Snaps, this sibling duo fights their enemies together and defeats the primary werewolf. The duo is injured by a werewolf on their way back home, and they slowly start going through symptoms of lycanthropy. Ellie's boyfriend, Jake, who was the primary villain all along, and it all comes as a complete surprise to her since he managed to fool her, even though his behavior hinted at it. Even though we don't witness a complete transformation from her, Ellie shows how brutal she can get around the end of the film. Jake comes around at the end and reveals his plan to kill Jimmy and take Ellie so that there's only one alpha left around. But Jimmy manages to fight back and Ellie fools Jake with a fake embrace only to get her fangs deep into his neck. Then she goes ahead and decapitates him with a shovel, thus getting rid of the curse, as Jake was the person who gave them the curse. Casey Spencer in Full Eclipse, 1993. Casey Spencer is a rather interesting character who, surprisingly, has a considerable screen presence compared to the other werewolves in Full Eclipse. The villainous character, played by Patsy Kensit, makes an exciting addition to the film, with tones of something that could belong to the world of Blade. Casey Spencer is a member of the team called The Pack, obviously, which takes certain chemicals to become werewolf-like creatures and take down criminals, but they don't arrest their targets. Instead, their enemies are mauled to death. Casey intends to make Max join them, so much so that she tries to seduce him, and even though he rejects the idea, she manages to inject him with the serum. Max joins her on a mission to hunt down some drug runners, and even he ends up killing the entire group of thugs with Casey. Even though Casey successfully turns Max, she gets attacked by her leader, Adam. However, Casey decides to side with Adam, and upon discovering this, Adam attacks the duo. To save themselves, they leap out of the window and land on the ground with severe injuries. Even though Casey had been quite the villain, she redeems herself by giving Max the serum so he can heal and sacrifices herself. An end like this provides her some depth compared to most other cases where characters like Casey become simple henchwomen to the main antagonist. Carolyn Newcliff in The Beast Must Die, 1974. This horror classic features quite the cast, with some of the significant players played by veterans of the genre, like Peter Cushing himself. Jan Jarmuschowski's mystery is the primary plot of the movie. Still, even then, Carolyn's character ends up being a significant part of the movie, even though her turn as the monster is purely by mistake. The movie has a very "and then they were none" vibe, with the objective of the millionaire Tom Newcliff being to find the werewolf among his guests. Jan Jarmuschowski, the werewolf, realizes he has to cover up his act and manages to save himself by putting hurdles into Tom's plans. One of these hurdles ends up being Tom's wife, Carolyn herself. During the film's climax, Tom performs a final test to check for the werewolf, and Carolyn volunteers for this test. The test involves keeping a silver bullet in their mouth, considering silver is one of the monster's weaknesses. As Carolyn goes for the test, her hand starts getting hairy as she starts turning into the beast, and right then, Tom shoots her to death. Later, it is revealed that she became a werewolf because she was tending to the wounds of her dog, one of the victims of Jan's spree of killing. Even though it doesn't make her for an impactful addition to this list, if you watch the film, you will understand how interesting Carolyn's twist is. For a 1965 film, La Loba is indeed one of the most interesting Mexican horror films. It also gives us another great female character who takes on this wild genre. Clarissa is looking for a cure for her disease, and it will not be easy since her rampage has quite an impact on the village. She reaches out to Dr. Alejandro Bernstein, who is looking for her cure, but the two end up falling for each other. They go on their rampage together across the town until they finally meet their demise. The film boasts some of the most exciting storytelling styles for a monster film, and even has impressive effects when showing the character's transformation into the beast. One of the best scenes has to be when we see her playing the piano when the full moon rises. Her character has an ominous tone, and even though she is a monster, her problem makes the viewer feel for her. She gets stabbed by an ivory knife around the end following the death of her lover by a werewolf hunting dog. One can say a lot about this movie, but what makes it unique is how perfectly it continues to affect its audience after so many years.
The gunsmith had 3 silver bullets in stock.
Black Deer in Blood Moon 2014. One of the first movies to feature a female werewolf was The Werewolf, a 1913 film with a Navajo girl as the protagonist, and it was pretty controversial. Blood Moon sees Black Deer as a similar character who intends to save the two men by using her as a Navajo guide. to look for a famous bank robber. She tells the men about the Skinwalkers, another name for the beast, and after a while, she is revealed to be half human and half Skinwalker herself. The problem with her kind was that humans and the Skinwalkers hunted her. As the blood moon appears, Black Deer transforms into her beastly self and attacks Marshal Wade Norman. Before the Marshal can kill her with silver bullets, she manages to get away. There is no clear indication regarding her fate in the movie except for the ending, in which we see her hiding from the werewolves in her human form. This movie doesn't make for a good story and depends entirely on the horror aspect, but it can make for a fun watch for a movie about werewolves and cowboys. Laurie in Trick or Treat, 2007. Anna Paquin is another veteran of the genre, having played roles in which she encountered quite a few monstrous creatures. But Trick or Treat is quite a fun anthology, and her performance in the surprise party story makes her one of the best additions to this list of such characters. Even though the film is quite brutal, this story turns out to be pretty fun once you are in on the joke, which might mean you have to be a fan of the genre. On Halloween, Laurie dresses up as Little Red Riding Hood, which she despises, but her sister tells her it is a tradition. On the way to a party with her sister's friends, she chooses to meet the girls later and continues the day's tradition. But to her surprise, a vampire is on the loose, targeting women across the town. The vampire targets her, only to find out that he is the bait himself, and Laurie ends up injuring her. They reach the woods where all the girls are with their dates, only to reveal that these dates are dead, and the girls turn into werewolves. Yes, the Red Riding Hood costume was quite the iconic part of the story, but the vampire's fate somehow makes it a lot more funny.
Get out of my room!
Carolyn Stoddard in Dark Shadows, 2012. Chloe Grace Moretz has played a vampire before in Let Me In, and her appearance as a werewolf becomes a significant twist. Dark Shadows already begins with quite a lot of fantasy in its tone, but as the arc shifts to the present-day scenario, we realize that these monsters must only be a thing of the past in the world. Barnabas Collins, the original protagonist of the movie, becomes quite a member of Carolyn's family over time, after his return following the curse that Angelique puts on him. Throughout the movie, we see many exciting things happen, but it is assumed that the Stoddards aren't in any way associated with all these elements. Carolyn, a typical angst goth teenager, fond of rock and some Alice Cooper, turns out to be a werewolf right around the climax. This was not surprising to the antagonist, Angelique, as she had ensured this when Carolyn was a baby by sending a werewolf to bite her. Carolyn had managed to keep it a secret from her family throughout all these years, and the circumstances forced her to take this turn. But around the end, when Angelique is defeated, we see Carolyn break her angst persona when returning to the human form and hugging her mother. Carolyn might be one of the only characters on this list with a modern tone, and Chloe Grace Moretz delivers the character perfectly. Zoe in Lost Boys, The Thirst, 2010. The third entry in the Lost Boys franchise features an exciting character, Zoe, who is capable of suppressing her true identity while helping the protagonist deal with the vampires. Zoe is highly informed regarding these creatures and is quite the partner to Edgar's protagonist as they balance the personas. The movie indicates that she and Edgar are in a relationship, but she never reveals her secret to him. This This arc makes for an exciting take on this franchise. We witness these characters fight vampires, since werewolves don't usually get along very well with vampires. It is not clarified if she is doing it for her tribe or if she is trying to save the humans from the vampires. Around the end, Edgar reveals that female werewolves can turn into their beastly form without the presence of the blood moon, to which Zoe agrees as her eyes become wolf-like. Sonia in Skinwalkers 2007. Natasha Malt's character Sonia is another example in a narrative in which the character serves as a henchwoman who shines in the film because of an interesting arc. She is the only female member of the group of werewolves, with Caleb as their Varric. It is shown in the movie that turning into a werewolf gave her a new perspective, considering she had a terrible life as a human. When Varric turned her, she became obsessed with him, going against anyone who tried to come on their path. She takes the mission to kill Timothy personally, which only ends up putting her life in danger when the duo of Timothy and Rachel, Varric's son and his wife, manage to kill her. Even though she doesn't make a solid mark, her streak as the werewolf makes for an exciting addition to the film's narrative. Even though one might say that there aren't many female werewolves in cinema history, this list indeed indicates that you only have to look. And while often these characters could end up being very one-dimensional, having a female werewolf only brought a whole new angle to the genre, making it much more exciting and fun.
And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.